Father Cristino, I hear it's a Jubilee year. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. So tell us, what does that mean?
Well, it's actually something really beautiful because I think you really, in a normal lifespan, could expect to experience two jubilees in the course of one's life, because the church has adopted the tradition of observing an ordinary jubilee every 25 years. But it actually has its roots way back in ancient Israel, and it's recounted in quite great detail in the first 5 books of the Bible, actually specifically in the book of Numbers and Leviticus, the description of what God wanted for his people by declaring jubilees. And that was in the Old Testament every 50 years. And the idea behind a jubilee was that it was a period of time that would probably occur probably only once in a person's lifetime, where for an entire year, it was like having a big reset. So there was a number of things that were stipulated about how the Jubilee was to be observed. All slaves were to be set free. So if you had been living in slavery, or you were in that class of people, you were restored to freedom. That you were to begin preparing for the Jubilee year in advance, so that you had enough food and grain put aside, that you had to let the fields lie fallow for the Jubilee year. You were to do no farming and do no work for reaping a harvest.
Okay.
You had to live off of what was already available. Obviously, some elements of that, like with livestock and whatever, would have to be a bit different. But the idea that even the earth was supposed to be given a break, that all debts were to be canceled, whether a person was able to repay them or not. So if the Jubilee was coming, you knew that if you were deep in debt, that was going to be forgiven. And then essentially you were to seek to strive and have a reconciliation among your people, among your kin, and those around you with whom there might have been some form of division or tension. Mm-hmm. And so in God's vision, there was this need that he saw for his people, that at some point in everyone's life, they needed to enjoy this experience of everything getting to start fresh. And so in a way, it's a manifestation of God's mercy that the Jubilee would be called. And so the concept in the church was taken up many centuries into the life of the church. In the 14th century, there was a pope who, in keeping with the original concept of having a Jubilee, decided to call for a Jubilee. I don't remember now the dates off the top of my head, but it had to do with a significant turn. I think it was the turn of a century.
Okay.
And so the decree that he issued was that we would now observe this Jubilee. And then a subsequent pope to him decided that not only should that practice continue, but that in the Catholic faith, we would observe a Jubilee every 25 years. And so that's what put in motion this tradition and custom of observing Jubilee years. And now we have maintained being on that. Depending on the age of some of your viewers, you will remember that the last great Jubilee, the last ordinary Jubilee, was at the turn of the millennium. Mm-hmm. In the year 2000, we celebrated in a very pronounced and prominent way in the Catholic Church this Jubilee of the new millennium.
Yeah, I remember that with John Paul II.
Exactly.
Right? And I do remember this sense of I don't know what it was, just focusing on God's generosity and his mercy towards us. Back then I was just starting off in ministry. It would have been my second year, but that was kind of the beginning of my full-time service in the church. And it does stick out in my mind. But as we go to 2025, somebody's listening, they might be thinking, well, how is this applicable in my life? Why does this matter to me? Because that's why people kind of tune in. They want to know relevance, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, first, I think it's relevant because it's something for us to participate in universally with the whole church. There's lots of, I don't know what to call them, kind of like little flashes in the pan and sort of these gimmicks every once in a while that I think come out from the Vatican. And I don't know that we even pay any attention to them. We hear, this year is the year of such and such. And an entire year, that whole year might go by. Do you recall that we had the year of St. Joseph not that long ago.
Right. Yes.
It was the year of St. Joseph. St. Joseph is the universal patron of the church. He's the patron saint of Canada. Oh, and then we also had COVID that year. Whoops. And so, like, what happened? Poor St. Joseph.
Yeah.
He had a whole year dedicated to him. And I don't recall a single meaningful thing happening during the year of St. Joseph. So we kind of have these things all the time, and they often don't take off or get much attention.
Yes.
The Jubilee, though, is a well-established rhythm and routine in our life as Catholics. And because of it having this significance on really trying to immerse ourselves in the gift of God's mercy, it's important for us to realize that in the course of a lifetime, our faith is, the Catholic Church is saying we want people to experience it at least twice. I think that's the point about having it every 25 years instead of 50 years, because it gives you really that capacity to say, this year, I want to be a year where I'm really going to enter in a more intentional way. At the beginning of every year, people always have their New Year's resolutions. And I'm going to lose weight, and I'm going to learn this language, and I'm going to travel to this country. And then those things happen or they don't. And if they don't, we might just shrug our shoulders and say, oh, well, I don't know what I was even thinking. But a Jubilee year, I think, calls forth from us not a response of, what am I going to do for myself this year, but what do I want to receive from the Lord this year? How am I going to allow the Lord to impact me in a more intentional way? Because he's giving me this year. This is something he has decreed from divine revelation that he wants his people to experience. So how am I opening myself to receive something from him? This is symbolized in a very pronounced way at the Vatican. At St. Peter's Basilica at the Vatican, there is a set of doors that are known as the Holy Doors, which are only opened during a Jubilee year. And in fact, not only are they not kept closed outside of a Jubilee year, but they actually have a concrete wall put over top on either side of the door so that they cannot be accessed. And they're very beautiful. They're works of art in themselves, and they're hidden from us. Every 25 years, we go this long span of time where you just don't see them. And then the concrete is broken down and taken away, and there are the doors. And the Holy Father, at the start of the Jubilee, opens the doors and then invites pilgrims from everywhere in the world to come and pass through those doors. It's a very powerful and symbolic representation of what it means to enter into the gift of God's grace, that he's opening a new doorway for us, that he wants to make something new for you. All you have to do is pass through it. Now, obviously, the vast majority of Catholics are not able to make their way to Rome during the Jubilee year and walk through that set of doors. And so the Pope actually decrees that every cathedral in the world is supposed to designate the doors of their cathedral as Jubilee doors during the Jubilee year. And the same privileges, in fact, we have something called a plenary indulgence. Mm-hmm. There's plenary indulgences attached to passing through the holy doors during a year of Jubilee. So that you can even just make a little pilgrimage. You and your family could make a pilgrimage into Saskatoon, and when you pass through the Jubilee doors of your cathedral, to have tried to enter into that mentality that you want to walk through whatever God has planned for you this year. What is the new thing that he wants to reveal to you during the Jubilee?
In terms of the indulgence that you mentioned, can you walk us through what sort of preparations one should do prior to do that? Because there's conditions to open ourselves to the graces of that indulgence, isn't there?
Mm-hmm. So a plenary indulgence actually means the full and complete pardon and remission of all of your sins and the effects of sin in your life.
Pretty big deal.
So it's like going back to the state of grace that you received on the day of your baptism. And it's like a completely fresh start. But in order to be able to receive that grace, you have to meet some conditions. And those conditions are always the same, that you free yourself from attachment to sin, which means that anything in your life that you know is keeping you caught in sin, that you free yourself from whatever that might be, that you go to confession, that you receive Holy Communion within 8 days on either side of that confession, and that you pray for the intentions of the Holy Father. And when you've met those conditions and then performed whatever the action is that has the plenary indulgence attached to it, so in this case, passing through those doors, you can then be completely immersed in that sense of having really renewed yourself in God's grace, saying, we're making a fresh start. We're turning a new leaf. This is a new reality for us. And leading up to participating in that is meant to be a time of anticipation and the realization that God is providing a way for me to really make a fresh start. I think so many people go through their life feeling like they don't even know where to begin. They don't know how to change the things that are causing them trouble. I think the Jubilee gives us a reminder that this is God's will for us. He wants us to experience his mercy in a new way. And so he opens literal pathways for us to be able to receive that.
Some might be wondering, well, like, where's the church's authority to do such a thing? Can you speak to that?
Well, sure. I think part of the reason why when we have a condition for the plenary indulgence to be that you pray for the Holy Father is because we see this associated with Christ in Matthew's gospel when he declares to Peter, you are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. We symbolize the authority of the papacy by these two keys. And the idea being that the Pope possesses, by virtue of his office as the successor of St. Peter, the capacity to unlock the treasury of God's graces for us in a way that he has deemed meaningful and important for the life of the church and for the life of the faithful. And so it is his unique prerogative to be able to do that. Some might remember that Pope Francis even called for an extraordinary jubilee back in 2016. That was known as the Year of Mercy. But it wasn't just one of these thematic years like the Year of St. Joseph. He made it a Jubilee year, by which he extended the same graces that are happening this year by virtue of it just being every 25 years. And what I think is more meaningful and especially exciting about this Jubilee year, at least for the generation of Catholics that I would say are my age and older, is that this feels a little bit like participating in something that our beloved Pope John Paul II has left behind for us. His entire pontificate was ordered towards the Great Jubilee. He was elected Pope in 1978, and he was already then talking about preparing the church for the third millennium. His whole 22 years leading up to that as Pope was geared towards ushering the church into the third millennium. He talked about it continuously. And then during that Jubilee year, he gave us a beautiful document, Novo Millennio Ineunte, the encyclical that he wrote during the Jubilee year, calling for this, what sometimes now we would just more simply refer to as the new evangelization. But what he was really calling for was that Catholics would embrace their identity, what it truly means to be Catholics, not members of a club, but as we now very more popularly refer to it, missionary disciples who go out to share the good news of their faith and to give witness to their faith. And I feel like this Jubilee is kind of like one of our last vestiges of that closeness to him, of that feeling connected, because he reminded us that, I will not be with you for the next Jubilee. And in fact, he died in 2005. But he really put it in the minds of the vast majority of adult Catholics that are alive today, that this mattered, that this was important, that this was significant for the life of the whole church and for the whole world. And one of the ways that I think it's going to be most beautifully realized this year will be with the canonization of Blessed Pier Giorgio Frassati. And he will be declared a saint in August, and he died 100 years ago in 1925.
Okay.
And it was a Jubilee year. And in one of the last journal entries we have in his diary, that he reflects upon how important and significant he thought it was that he had this privilege of living in a Jubilee year. He was born in 1901, so he had just missed the Jubilee of 1900, and he only lived to be 24 years old. And so that was the only Jubilee of his life. And at the time that he wrote that, I don't think he even realized that he was soon going to die. But he was reflecting upon the grace that it was to live in a Jubilee year and what that meant for him. And he had this vision for the revitalization of his college peers and university students, for especially the rebuilding of Italy after the First World War. And so he really dreamed big. And so I think he captured and understood the significance of what it meant to live in a Jubilee. And I just think it's so beautiful that exactly 100 years later, in another Jubilee, we're going to witness his canonization. And I'm very, very grateful that I will be there, leading a group of young people and university students to Italy for the Jubilee year, and to participate in that canonization of someone who is just such an inspiration to me.
Yeah, I'm getting a sense that you're really behind this.
Yes. And I want to get people excited about it.
Yeah, because I think a lot of times right now in the state of the church, people hear something coming out of the Vatican and are like, wah, 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 wah. Like it's just something, another thing.
Yeah.
Particularly after like this long drawn out synod on synodality, just really for many people was a miss in terms of how does this apply to me? There was some participation, but really, I think people kind of started to tune out.
Yeah.
And so by default, then you just kind of get, oh, this is just another thing. But you're cautioning against that, aren't you?
Very much so. I'm trying to say, so I'm grateful that we're having this conversation and that hopefully your viewers and listeners will be blessed by it, because this isn't just another thing to sort of roll our eyes at and say, oh yeah, another thing that the Vatican wants us to do. This isn't the Vatican. God has given his people a concept of rejoicing in the gift of freedom and healing and reconciliation in a Jubilee. And so we need to take advantage of that this year.
Which is why we began the conversation with you explaining the historical context of going right back to the Old Testament where this happened on a very practical level with God's chosen people, right?
Right.
And so this history of grace, there's a pattern of this, right? And so this is not a novelty. This is not just an idea. This is a church dipping into the treasuries of the church, the Pope exercising his rightful authority to say, let's open wide these doors, calling forth a deeper grace of God into our life. And should not we expect this? If this is what the Vicar of Christ has declared, using his lawful authority, fulfilling what Jesus, he said, he gives the keys to bind and loose, and should not we expect grace in this year?
Right, exactly. But we, not only should we expect it, but then we have to be active participants in receiving it. Right? To go back to the image of Pope John Paul II, many of us will remember the very moving sight of him already very burdened under the weight of his Parkinson's, almost leaning onto the Jubilee door that night that he opened up the Jubilee doors. And you can see that he pulled the whole weight of the church with him to try and open those doors. But all he was really doing was showing us the fulfillment of the very first words he preached to us as Pope in the homily that he gave after his election as Pope in 1978. He said, open wide the doors to Christ. He was reminding us of that this was a literal thing that he was doing in front of us now, but it was what he was asking us to do and to see. It was our responsibility that we open the doors of our hearts. He used an interesting word when he preached in the Italian. He says, aprite, open, and then he says, no, spalancate. That means more like burst the doors off their hinges. Don't just turn the doorknob and gently leave it ajar. He was saying, bust this door off. Open wide the door of your heart to Christ. Spalancate. Let this burst of energy and enthusiasm. And so I hope that we can take him up on that invitation in this Jubilee year and really open our hearts to the graces that God wants to give us throughout 2025.
I wonder, how can a family participate in this? Like, when's the best time for me to take my family through those cathedral doors? And in what ways I can prepare my family to do this? I don't know if you necessarily have the answers, but this is what immediately comes to my mind. Like, should we wait until when does the year end?
It'll run until the Feast of the Epiphany, January 6th, 2026.
We've got a ways away yet here. So, like, do we do it in the summer, when you're in Rome, or do we do it before Christmas? Like, when? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think that's something a family should really be intentional about trying to discern, especially mom and dad. They should try and discern with each other when would be a way that we can make this experience feel like something meaningful, that we've given our family time to prepare, that we knew that we were doing this. And maybe if there was some kind of special family celebration or some occasion when the family was already going to be celebrating anyhow, and then attaching to that celebration this extra special way, so that moving forward, every other time you celebrate this thing, you remember. But remember in 2025, when we celebrated this by going through the Jubilee doors. I think parents helping their children also cultivate this imagination, because if they're your children now, God willing, we would hope and pray that in all likelihood, they will live to see another Jubilee, and to be able to reflect back on that, just as we're remembering what it was like at the turn of the millennium in the year 2000, and this just real spirit of excitement that was filling the church. We want to replicate that for our children and not just make it seem like some kind of church field trip.
Yeah. I can't help but think back to that time, actually. As we're talking, I just feel like my memory is just like racing through some certain things. And I don't know if I'm reaching to connect dots or not, but like that great Jubilee in 2020.
2000.
Sorry, 2000, my apologies. Yes. Like for me, that was my first year of full-time service within the church. And, it was like, and I was just starting. I failed my way forward. But as I look at 2020 to 2022, 2023, it's like this unbelievable grace that I witnessed started to happen. And I had nothing to compare it to. I look back at that period of time, which is the beginning of what is known as face-to-face ministries, an organization I had the privilege of starting, still continues here in Western Canada. But the amount of fruit that we saw was mind-boggling. Like, we expected conversion every weekend, and it was lasting. Like, what we saw was just kids coming to these events, bringing their parents having conversions, vocations coming out. I know that you spent some time last night with Father Colin. Like he was a part of that. Father Dan was a part of that. Like, so there's so many just lasting fruits. Like, it's just not a flash in the pan. Forget about, just another weekend. No, it was just this constant roll of grace before your eyes. And I just thought, well, this is how it's supposed to be. It almost seemed at that time effortless. We'd go do a youth event. Hundreds of kids would come. Great participators in the sacrament of reconciliation, people encountering Christ, them telling their parents about it, the word spreading, the kids evangelizing their peers. The next event comes, they're bringing more people. They would show up to towns of like 30 people, 50 people, little villages in Saskatchewan, and there could be 200 to 300 participants show up. Pretty significant to a little town. We're talking about a little town in rural Saskatchewan. And now I look back, so I'm saying this, I look back and like, was it the Jubilee, the Great Jubilee? Was it the pushing, flinging open those doors and this great ushering of grace coming in? Because, man, I get emotional when I think back to that, but it's like there was this great expectation in the hearts of people at that time to look onto the horizon and to expect good things. Like, as I began to work within the church, I started to get to know people from across Canada who were doing kind of the same work as I was. And I would say there was this unity of vision, there was a unity of expectation, there was a unity of like evangelization. And when you looked forward, we thought good things. And we saw so much fruit. Like I don't want to take up this, but like it was just so fruitful. Janelle and I's relationship developed through that. Like, and still wonderful things are continuing to happen to this day. It led me to speak more internationally. I'm so grateful. But it's different now. I'm sorry to say. It's like for many, the wind has come out of the sails. And maybe it's just me, but when I look at the horizon, it just isn't as hopeful as that was initially in the Great Jubilee. When you look at the church and its divisiveness and like unclear teaching, or just like there isn't a sense that we're all in this together right now.
Right.
Like there was at 2000.
Yeah.
It's very different.
And that's why we need a Jubilee. That's what I think God is trying to say to us. The Jubilee year, the events are managed by the Vatican. The Jubilee comes from God. He declares this to be a Jubilee year. And that's why this is something that we can feel is coming directly from the hands of our Father. I think he wants to blow the wind back into our sails again. And especially as he points us towards the next great and extraordinary Jubilee, which is the Jubilee of 2033, the bimillennial, the 2000th anniversary of our salvation, when we will remember our Lord's sacrifice for us that saved the world. I should hope, most of everyone who will be listening to this, we would hope, unless the world has ended by then, that we would all still be around here 8 years from now and participating in this pivotal moment in history, 2,000 years since our salvation. And all these little things that are going to fill up the time in between there. In 2031 will be the 500th anniversary of Our Lady of Guadalupe. In 2030, it will be the 2000th anniversary of our Lord beginning his public ministry. You know, there are ways in which I see that we are taking these steps towards the great Jubilee of 2033 and the Jubilee year of 2025. I feel is God just ramping things back up again. And so instead, I would say, and I understand all of what you just described, instead of looking back to the year 2000 and saying, at that Jubilee, we were in such a better position than it feels like we are now, I would say, what if instead we say, I know things don't look great right now, but imagine where we'll be because of the push and the start that has been afforded to us in 2025.
I hope it to be true.
Me too.